What is up, everybody? You would usually be Brady, but I am Lou Betchy, filling in on the MMA engine, trying to imitate his cadence as best I can. Welcome to Propability, data-driven look at the all-time props for this card. I am joined by the guy behind all this and his conception, Uncle Weezy. How we doing, boss?
Yeah, we're doing good, man. We're doing good. Had a nice little week off last week. Got a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff done. And now we've got a 6-week stretch here of straight UFC competition here on Saturdays. So kind of getting into another long stretch of work here. And we're easing into it this week, Lou. I mean, we are easing into it nice and slow, like a first time. You know what I'm saying? Look, this is the amuse-bouche, if you will, for the main course that comes next week. And it is a very, very small amuse-bouche. It is not going to fill us up. But also at the same time, we don't want to be loading up on bread before this great meal that we're going to have next week, because next week has really got some phenomenal fights. This week, what we see on this card is a lot of fights that are pretty easy to predict, that probably are going to go one way, and the bookies are all over it. They're overpricing all the obvious plays this week. We've got to tread very lightly. We've got to go into this week with a long-term approach and really only try and hit the spots where we feel like we're getting an edge. And in order to find that edge, Lou, we're going to have to dig deep, because it is rough out there this week.
Well, luckily, that's what this show helps out with, digging deep on not the sides, but on time props. Before we get started, thank you guys all for joining. Please hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to the MMA Engine. Every little bit helps. Let me give a shout to the chat. We got Victor DeJesus here, my guy Propaholic, grateful dude, Bob Spikermans, Rob Lawrence, Bailey. MMA Engine's me, so I'm not going to welcome that. And Chad, thank you guys for tuning in. If you're watching this on a replay, thanks for spending your time checking it out. Why don't we dive right in, brother? You ready?
Let's do it, man. Let's do it. We got a very, very interesting Alaska FC fight here to start off this card. This would be on the undercard of Alaska FC. Little Jackson Rodriguez. What do you have to say on this one before we get into the numbers?
So, as somebody who made money betting Mike Jackson on his last fight, I did not have Mike Jackson and Yam Bags. Looking back, I probably should have. It's a lot of similar. It's kind of similar to me. It's a guy with, 5 pro fights. Mike Jackson, I have to say, he's going to be the second best guy he's ever fought, because Jack Della way better.
Yeah.
But I think Mike Jackson's better than the other guys he's fought. My question here for you is this. So this under 1.5 is crazy juiced, as you can see. By the way, all the lines that I pulled are from Betway. It was the only one that was consistent throughout on Best Fight Odds. So, your mileage may vary on certain books. I know DraftKings has this at minus 265, but this seems to be about a standard line for it. Is this under completely just correlated to the theory that Rodriguez is finishing him in round 1? Because Mike Jackson hasn't shown any finishing ability.
Yeah, it has to be, right? I mean, I don't think there's a lot of people out there that are looking at this stylistic matchup and saying, yeah, Jackson sparks Rodriguez in the first, right? I mean, come on. We've got more tape on Mike Jackson than we actually do on Rodriguez. You could watch Mike or Rodriguez's entire career sitting on the toilet, and
I have.
I know. Before you flushed, you'd be done with all 5 of his professional fights. So, obviously it's correlated to that, but it's almost like you're betting minus 265. Here, let's put minus 265 here, because we see the minus 400 there, and that's an 80% implied probability. But even at minus 265, which is what we see on DraftKings, that's a 72.6% implied probability. And we look at these 3 numbers right here. Now, this is your benchmark, right? So it takes the implied probability of 81.82%, and it subtracts that number from the benchmark, which indicates how often fights finish inside the distance at the 170-pound division. I have that number down here. That number is 48.58%. So there's a 48.58% chance on the benchmark that this fight finishes inside the distance. We're paying 81.82%. We're overpaying by 33.23% when we compare that implied probability of the line to the benchmark for the division. But you only see that kind of a divergence when your eyes tell you that this thing is going to finish inside the distance. So this is the bookies saying, we know you're betting violence here. And yeah, you're probably going to cash this bet, but we're going to make you put up 4 units to win 1, 4.5 units to win 1, 6 units to win 1. They're just going to price this in a way that it makes it impossible to make money. Hang on. I'm sorry. I'm allergic to lines that are this juiced. It just makes it so I can't even talk. The thought of laying that kind of juice on Pete Rodriguez to finish anybody at the UFC level is ridiculous. So let's look. Let's just take a look. Let's just look at these numbers. Plus 210 for an over 1.5.
I love the non-violence tab, by the way.
Yeah. That's exactly what it symbolizes. We got the violence side, and then if you're more of a pacifist, you want to scroll to the right side of this template and find out when they're going to pay you to watch these overs, right? So fights go over 1.5. 66.92%. So basically over 2/3 of the time, you're only paying a 32.26% implied probability for this one to go over 1.5. You're getting a 34.66% discount against the benchmark. So in my opinion, right, if you were going to make a bet, now I don't think I'm making a bet on this fight, but if you're going to make a bet, the analytics are telling you the value is obviously on the non-violence side. There's no value on this violence side, but then again, it's probably going to cash. So you can parlay it up if you want to. I would never parlay with the thought of saying, I'm counting on Pete Rodriguez, somebody that I literally know nothing about. I know nothing about this guy. I've got 7 minutes. I've got more film of my brother and I fighting as children than I do of Pete Rodriguez in a professional cage, mixed martial arts cage, fighting other men. So, this is kind of ridiculous. To pay these kind of prices, it's just completely out of bounds. If you're one of those type of bettors that you only care whether the ticket cashes, then you might want to chase these violence bets, but they're completely overpriced. I'm staying away. I'm not counting on Pete Rodriguez to get the job done that quickly.
So now let me ask you the second part of the question. As I told you, I think, because of course I looked at this number and you know how I am with some of these numbers. If you think the under is correlated to Pete Rodriguez, Mike Jackson's decision is plus 1,100. I don't think if you like Mike Jackson to win, and he's plus 490, by the way, to win, don't you like him by decision? He's never shown he has any finishing ability. Yeah. And Rodriguez got finished. I know Rodriguez kind of wilted, but he's wilting against Jack Della, whose boxing is like bananas. Mike Rodriguez, his path here, I mean, look, the Dean Barry fight, let's forget about the CM Punk fight for a second. But even when Dean Barry was hurting him, he was trying to get him up against the cage, trying to go for takedowns, trying to stay out of trouble. If he has any success taking this guy down and just lays in praise, I feel like that decision is live. I'm not saying I'm getting to the window on it, but I do have content to fill on my prop show on Thursday, and that is something I will investigate. But yeah, Rodriguez feels like it's round one or bust. I mean, and your numbers are saying it's probably not even worth taking a poke on that.
Yeah, we don't have any evidence at all to suggest that Pete Rodriguez could even get off the stool after the first round. I mean, we've never even seen this guy pass 3 minutes in a fight, 7.5 minutes over a 5-fight career. So obviously, we just don't know anything about this guy. So yeah, I mean, the value is on the over bets here, and I'm just not betting it. Let's talk about some fights that are a little bit closer. Maybe we can find some value in the non-Alaska FC fights that we have on this card.
Well, the second fight of the night is one of the ones that I'm definitely looking forward to. That's CJ Vergara against Tetsuya Taira. Taira, a lot of hype behind him. His fight against Candelario, he made a couple mistakes, but he looked pretty good for a debut. It's as solid a debut as you can get. Vergara, it's a tough dude. Vergara has shown some good cardio late in fights, some toughness. They're fighting at 125, so obviously the finish rates for this are going to be a little lower, but I will let you go to town on this one.
Yeah, so if we're looking at the prop template here, we've got a plus 130 for the fight doesn't go, a plus 170 for the under 2.5, and a plus 240 for the under 1.5. Now, these violence bets are priced fairly according to the benchmark. We're overpriced by about 2.2% here. We're underpriced by less than 1% here, and we're overpriced by less than 2% here. But we see big negative numbers here when we're comparing those fighter finish rates to the implied probability of the line and the fighter finish rates to the divisional finish rates. So it's telling us that there might be a little more value here on the other side. And then we look here, right? 15 of 25 combined professional fights for Tatsuro and CJ have finished inside the distance. That's actually kind of low. And then here at the UFC level, only 1 of 4 have finished inside the distance. So, and it was CJ sparking that dude early on the Contender series.
Right.
If we go over here, we're seeing 40% of their fights going to decision on a whole, 75% of their UFC fights going to decision. And we see, like, for instance, here, for the fight goes to decision, underpaying by 11.36%, albeit in a small sample size, and 16.28% when we compare these guys' finish rates, these guys' decision rates to the decision rate of the division at 125 pounds. So we're definitely seeing some bigger plus numbers here on the non-violent side of the bets, and we're not overpaying by big margins, right? Only 5% here, 4.5% here, and 5.44% here. So I would say that both of these look bettable if you consider that, that this fight, if you think that it is going the distance. Now, just to be fair, we got to remember that these fights are going to decision about 58.72% of the time. I shouldn't say about. How about exactly 58.72% of the time? Because that's how precise my metrics are. But we are paying 63%. Tatsuro, very dangerous everywhere the fight goes. He's got really nice striking for a 22-year-old, and his grappling, his ability to be able to get on his opponent's back, get that body triangle in, keep you there, hunt for chokes, look for ground and pound, all looking very good. But CJ on the other side, this dude pressures constantly. He's very durable. He's got excellent conditioning, and he throws a lot of volume, and he throws with power. He's also showed very good takedown defense thus far. He has been taken down a couple of times, but got right back up, is not really giving up position on the ground at this point in his career. So I think CJ is very live here. I think that both of these guys are very good, and I think both of these guys are very determined and difficult to finish. If these fight goes numbers or over 2.5 numbers go down anymore, if these -5%, -4.5% get closer to 0, I think it will be worth betting. But at this point, I don't see any value really in either side because where we see the big plus numbers, they're based on a 4-fight sample size here. That's not enough of a sample size for us to get really giddy about those big plus numbers. And then when we look over here to the non-violence bets, they're fairly priced here according to the benchmarks, and they're overpriced according to what these guys have done thus far at the UFC level. So I would say this is kind of one that I would just stay away from. But in my opinion, because of the stylistic components of this matchup, I would rather bet over than I would bet under.
Yeah, I'm with you. And just to add one more thing to this, I always get leery when I understand that Taira has fought, let's say, questionable competition on the Japanese regionals, but I always get leery when you have a guy who's undefeated against a guy who I know is pretty durable, because you have a guy that's shown that he doesn't get finished versus a guy we've never seen lose. So to suggest it would go under, it's like you're kind of taking a flyer on guessing an exact stylistic fight. So I'm with you. I love the overs here, but it's good to see that we're really, they nailed this one with the pricing. So
that's the beautiful thing about having these benchmarks, because that benchmark really does give you an idea. because when the stylistic matchup, tells you it's going to go one way or another, like if I flip back here to Jackson Rodriguez, overpriced by 33% here, and we see a Vergara fight, we're overpriced by 2.2%. But like sometimes that 2.2% is a little more important than the 33% simply because it's a fight that could go either way. When you're overpricing something by 33%, it's the bookies telling you, look, we know it's going under too. Right. We're just not going to give you shit if you hit the bet.
We're going to charge you big.
Exactly. And if a banana peel happens, sorry, your 4 units to win 1 are coming our way, and we get to keep it. So, yeah, it's this one is it feels like another stay away, Lou. It's a little bit discouraging as value hunting has been this week.
Well, this next fight's going to be interesting to see what you come up with numbers-wise, solely because of how big the under and the fight doesn't go prop is. Taira Rodriguez making her second fight in the UFC against Sam Hughes, coming off a pretty excellent showing and a nice third-round finish in her last fight. What do you have for this one? By the way, I don't know what the average weight is on this card. When I was typing up this banners, I was like, wow, there's a lot of 125, 125, 135, 135, including Cub, which we will get to later. But take it away with Taira and Sam Hughes.
So once again, when we're looking at these benchmarks, right, -3%, -2.5%, -1%, that's an indication of a fairly priced line. And we're seeing the same thing here on the over side, on the non-violent side, fairly priced lines. And then a lot of numbers that are close to zero, fairly priced based on the metrics as well. But it looks like these violence props, even though they're +200, +240, +350, are a little more overpriced than the unders, than these overs are. As we get a little bit of this over 2.5 here at -300, we see some decent numbers there. But let's look at the finish rates for both fighters, right? So we see the overall finish rates here. Actually, let me go up one. There we go. 63% finish rate for these two ladies as professionals combined. And we see that both of them are right there, 62.5, 63.5. So it's not like one of them's finishing 100% of her fights, the other one's finishing 40. And we see that 5 of the 7 fights that these ladies have had combined at the UFC level have went the distance. Only 2 of them have finished inside the distance here. So, but here's the thing. Sam Hughes' last 2 fights have been against pure strikers. And I'm talking pure strikers. Ladies with no ground game whatsoever. Elise Reed and Estela Nunez,
Elise Reed actually tried to do ground game last fight.
Yeah. And she did it against somebody with absolutely no ground game.
With somehow less ground game in that.
Exactly, which is why I bet Elise Reed in that fight, because it said, it's a striker versus striker matchup, and one of the fighters is +150. Now, Taira can wrestle. She's not great, but she started mixing in the wrestling. When you watch the tape on Taira, pre-UFC, pre-Dana White Contender Series, she's just throwing hands. She throws with power. She's looking to take your head off. Then in the Dana White Contender Series fight against Machado, she shot like over 10 takedowns in that fight and was going to the grappling quite a bit because she was undersized compared to her opponent. And then even in the debut against Kay Hansen, she found some success grappling against Kay Hansen there. And it wasn't until Kay actually started standing up and striking that she had a little bit of success against Taira. But Taira is going to be able to handle whatever Sam brings in the grappling because she's a legitimate grappler in her own right. She's a boxer first, but she does have a well-rounded game. So I don't think we're going to see Sam have success in the grappling. But both of these ladies are decent finishers, but the unders are a little bit overpriced in comparison to the benchmark, which surprises me a little bit. And these overs are even a little bit more overpriced, and they're priced right with these ladies' metrics. And we've got 7 fights, so it's not the worst sample size. I think this fight goes over, Lou, But am I laying minus 300 on an over 2.5 here? Nah, I'm not. I'm not even parlaying it. Once again, it feels like it's perfectly priced. It feels like there's not much value either way. And my read is over, but I'd rather have an under read and get the plus 240. You know what I'm saying? I don't have to be right nearly as often when I'm on the plus 240 side.
Sure.
You know, and I was just on a plus 210 for Damon Jackson versus Sabatini. And it was because why is a guy with Damon Jackson who has over a 90% career finish rate in wins and losses combined, why am I getting a 32%, implied probability for an under 2.5? It makes no sense. Right. When we find those divergences, that's when we can jump on the plus money side. But even the plus money side here are overpriced in comparison to the benchmark and in comparison to what these ladies are doing at the UFC level. So it's another stay away, man.
Yeah. Do you think, before we move on, do you think it's lined correctly? Do you think Rodriguez should be minus 170 in this fight? Because I find it hard to believe that she shouldn't.
Okay, so Sam looked great when she was able to mix in the wrestling against other strikers who don't have wrestling games. I don't think that if Sam doesn't, for instance, if Sam is striking with Piera and she decides, man, I don't like how this is going, I don't think she's going to be able to take Piera down. I mean, if Kay Hansen, who's a black belt, right? Or a brown belt, I think, at this point in her career. And Kay Hansen's still only 22, 23 years old. So you're talking about a very accomplished grappler in Kay Hansen, had little to no success on the ground against Piera Rodriguez. So if Kay isn't having success, I don't see, what's Sam Hughes? Maybe a white belt, maybe a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I don't see her having success on the ground against Piera. And while it's standing, I'm very ready to say that Piera hits much harder and is much more dangerous. So I like the Piera side, but just like my man Brady, I have temporarily retired from laying juice on women's MMA money lines. And it kept me away from betting Mackenzie Dern 2 weeks ago.
I can confirm through sources I have that Kay Hansen is rigorously working on her ground game since she left the UFC.
Okay.
Rigorously,
I
daily.
Like getting a good rogering or actually putting on the gi, or maybe a little bit of both.
My lawyer's not here.
Okay,
so
fair enough.
I can't comment any further on this topic.
Our MMA engine lawyers are the best. We have the best,
It's Wheezy's brother. I've spoiled it. All right, next fight on the card at 145. I have no numbers for this. At least where I looked, I did not see a number when I made this. That would be Joe Anderson Brito taking on Lucas Alexander. Like I said, I had no numbers earlier in the day when I looked at this. And I still do not have any numbers for this. So,
so we have no lines, but what we do have, even on an empty prop template, is the finish rates of both fighters. And we don't know shit about Lucas Alexander, right? So, but Bootsy really is on the Lucas Alexander side, which I have no idea how, because I haven't even watched any footage on this guy yet. So if he's like watching footage of fighters that I don't know anything about yet, maybe we should get Bootsy out here. But if we see that Lucas here, 9 professional fights, 5 of them have finished inside the distance. Lucas has been finished in both of his losses. And Joe Anderson Brito has been finished in 2 of 3 losses. So 80% of these guys' combined losses have come inside the distance. I think that's very important to note. And the only guy who didn't finish Brito was Algio. And Algio's a volume guy, a minute winner. He's not a finisher unless you go in there with Uncle Wheezy-esque cardio like Gilbert Burns' little brother did, Herbert.
And Algio was putting it on him a lot in the 3rd round too. I mean, it wasn't like, and he still wasn't really close to a finish.
Oh yeah, I know, definitely. I mean, like, that's the thing is that, you have to look and see. I love that, the fact that 4 out of 5 of these guys combined fights that were losses finished inside the distance has me leaning on the violence side here. And Brito's fights have been going to decision at the UFC level, except for the Feely fight because of the Algio fight. So very interesting there. even the Dana White Contender Series fight. So this might be one because the line hasn't opened yet, because we got a guy taking a fight on short notice who's been finished in both of his losses, and because we have Joe Anderson Brito, who we know kind of doesn't have a really good pacing ability. He goes out there to take your head off.
He's not paid by the hour.
Yeah, he is not. He is absolutely not. So even though we have no numbers here, I'm going to be looking for an under 2.5 that opens up in a decent spot here, because that could be a place that we could find the first time prop on this card that actually has some value, that's not perfectly priced, or it's not just overpriced because everybody sees the fight the same way. So we'll have to see where the unders open up on this one. But like I say, the key number, Lou, is this number right here. And that's that 4 out of 5 combined pro losses that have finished inside the distance.
Right.
Almost 70% of these guys, 26 combined professional fights, have finished inside the distance. So we're probably going to have to pay a little bit of juice for an under 2.5. But if we can get it better than minus 150, minus 160, it might be worth looking at. And, just so you guys know, under 1.5 happens 26.93% of the time at 145 pounds. Under 2.5 happens 38% of the time under 2.5 rounds. So at 38% of the time, that's like a plus 150, because 40% is plus 150. So we would get like plus 155, plus 160 for an under 2.5. So you never know. The bookies might, because they don't have UFC info on Alexander, and because Brito has went the distance in 2 of his 3 UFC fights, we might see a plus number on that under 2.5. And if we do, we're going to probably have to jump on that, Lou.
I also wonder if it being at 145 will, if this was the same kind of fight at 185, I don't think we're getting a good number. But
yeah, exactly. Because at 185, we would see a much higher percentage of fights that do finish under 2.5 in comparison to 145, which is definitely one that, here, let's look at the analytics. I want to show you guys something real quick. When we're talking about 145-pound fights, right? If we look at the analytics and the fight doesn't go, that I'm circling right here, for featherweight fights, they finish inside the distance 43% of the time. But you go down a weight class, they're finishing at 7% better. You go up a weight class, they finish 7.5% better. So featherweight is one of those fights when you see something stick out violence-wise, you're probably going to get a good number, because those featherweight fights, they finish at a much lower rate than the weight classes that sandwich them. So hopefully we can find a plus money, but even up to minus 150, I think there'll be value in this under 2.5 here. And like my guy Victor said there in the chat, Alexander looks like he does have pretty crisp, pretty nice striking here. So very interesting matchup. I'm looking forward to this one.
I am as well. I am just doing one last check to see if we actually
did we get any kind of an opening number on this?
I mean, I don't even have a line. I don't have any lines. So it's,
I don't even think they opened up a money line yet. So we're gonna have to wait on this one, but we'll see what we get, because I know they just made this fight yesterday.
Right. All right. Well, we'll move on to the 5th fight. Some bigger boys here at 185, and I'm getting some PTSD because it's a Malcoon fight. But Nick Maximov against Jake Malcoon, under 2.5 is plus 200. Not surprising there, especially with the style and the way Malcoon fights. Fight doesn't go, plus 175. For a Malcoon fight, I feel like this number is low, but it's still at 185. So very curious to see what the numbers say here.
Okay, so this is another one. We look at, on the violence side here, we're getting almost a 19% break over the benchmark at plus 175. We're getting almost an 18% break over the benchmark at plus 210, and a 12% break under the benchmark at under 1.5. So the bookies are trying to shade us towards betting the unders here. And when we look at the stylistic components of this matchup, it's a wrestler versus a wrestler. So either these guys wind up striking for 15 minutes. And if that happens, this fight almost definitely goes the distance, because neither one of these dudes could squash a grape on the feet.
No.
And
I
even if
don't even know who I'd favor. I don't even know who I'd favor. I mean,
I don't know either, man. Throw a dart because that's pretty much what these guys do on the feet anyway. Neither one of them is known for their striking. Malcoon's seriously undersized for this weight class, and Maximov blocks punches with his face, dude. I mean, like he's very durable. Maximov is the more durable guy. Malcoon, in my opinion, is the better conditioned guy here. But this is probably going to be a wrestling match. And, I see the stylistic components of this matchup, and I'm immediately thinking over. But, of course, the bookies are all over it, Lou. 26.5% overpriced here at minus 250 for the fight goes. 22% overpriced here for the over 2.5 at minus 260. And look at that. We're even paying more for the over 2.5 than we're paying for the fight goes, and only by about 1%, So it's kind of weird there, that we're only paying that much less for the over 2.5. So you'd much rather pay minus 260 for the over 2.5 than you would pay minus 250 for the fight goes, because there's a little bit more value there. But still, man, I mean, this is a rough one. This is a really rough one because these are two extremely good athletes, very good grapplers, both excellent wrestlers. Probably the submission grappling advantage goes to Maximov, but I really like Malcoon's control, his conditioning, and his ground and pound. This is a coin flip fight. I think it probably goes the distance. But to lay minus 260 on an over 2.5 in a men's middleweight fight when they're going over 2.5 50% of the time, only 50% of the time, we're paying 72. So the bookies see the same thing that we see in the stylistic matchups. If you see a submission happening here, if you see ground and pound potentially finishing this fight, get over here on these big fat numbers, plus 210 for the under 2.5. It's underpriced by a lot compared to the benchmark, but still overpriced when we compare it to what these guys are doing, which is only a 53% finish rate as pros and only 25% of their UFC fights finishing inside the distance, and both of them in losses. So that means neither one of these guys has finished a win at the UFC level. Right. So the stylistic components lead me to the non-violence bets. And then when I look at the non-violence bets, I see them horribly overpriced, and I see there's no value there. And when there's no value, you don't lay minus 260. You just don't.
You want to field this question, Wheezy, that was in chat?
Yes. Okay. So this is available on my Patreon. I make this available to people because we only show it on Propability, and every once in a while I'll show it a little bit on Just the Tip with Uncle Wheezy or on Ask Wheezy. But if you go to patreon.com/Uncle Wheezy with a capital U and a capital W, you'll see my page and you can sign up. It's $20 a month to get the analytics and the prop template, but it's only $5 a month. Just sign up and get the basic stats, which I show you guys every week. These for the stylistic matchups and for the career statistics that we have for every fighter. And that's obviously included on the other tier for the Patreon as well. So thanks.
One more comment I just wanted to add about this fight. Even though it does not play here, it's weird that we're getting two guys that I find to be very durable that have both been finished in 18 seconds for Malcoon against Hawes. Then I know it says a little bit more than a minute against Petrosky, but it felt like that fight was over in 30 seconds. And these were fights that ended because of good striking. But
yep.
So
very interesting because we got guys that have been finished, So when you see that, that's when you start looking at the plus money numbers and say, maybe I'll take a shot. But you don't take shots when you're laying juice and that juice is still overpriced, man. You can't do that.
Right. All right. Well, but that may have to be one of my split decision specials as a prop.
Not a bad look, man.
I'm wondering if, like, typically the line for a fight to go to split decision, I mean, not at heavyweight, but like typically you're getting around plus 400 to make that bet. I wonder if this fight it's going to be like plus 250.
It could be,
seriously,
man.
It might. They may just not even make it worth it. But let's move on to the next bantamweight fight. We have Rafael Sansao taking on Victor Henry, coming back after a very impressive performance against Ronnie Barcelos. A shocking performance that probably won somebody $100,000 on DraftKings just for having him rostered in what they thought was salary relief. Probably won them the tournament.
Yeah.
I was surprised to see Henry be such a sizable favorite. I know he's not some rookie. I mean, like his experience outside the UFC is he's probably got one of the more vast resumes of anybody that's making their second fight in the company. But I was still surprised to see him this big a favorite in this fight. But what do you got for us on the time here?
Yeah, so we see some props here on the violent side, Lou, that they're priced right where they should be. Look at this: 0.36%, 0.55%, minus 2.51%, and they're a little bit overpriced in comparison to the metrics here. You don't want to be picking Rafael Sansao fights to finish inside the distance unless you think he's going to lose, because he's only finished 3 of his 11 wins at the UFC level. The guy is notorious for being in very slow-paced, low-output fights. This is a guy where if you're a DraftKings player, you remember like having Rafael Sansao in your lineup and him scoring 47 points in a win. I mean, I'm not joking about that. Like, that's the kind of output. And
I think I had him and Blagoy in his win where he won with like DeLima and he had like 59.
Yeah.
And I think DeLima had like, I don't know, 12.
Yeah,
it was unbelievable.
He's extremely low output, okay? And then you see a guy like Victor Henry, who landed 180 significant strikes against Hani Barcelos in 15 minutes. That's more strikes than Rafael Sansao has landed in since 2015. Okay, so like this guy is a very high volume striker here. But here's the thing, right? Victor Henry has never been finished in his entire pro career. Rafael Sansao has been finished in 4 of 6 losses at the UFC level and in 5 of 9 losses as a pro. So excuse me. So I'm thinking that maybe there might be some value in these under props here, but I'm looking for Victor Henry to finish. I'm not looking for a Sansao to finish. Not because I think that a Sansao is completely done or whatever. I mean, he certainly could be. He's old enough that we wouldn't be surprised if he came out here and just looked like garbage, you know? He's been knocked out in his last 2 losses. He's getting up there in age. And even though Victor Henry's an older bantamweight as well, sitting around 35 years old, it's Sansao who's sitting at what, 38 right now, I believe?
And definitely has has worn more physical damage at this point in his career also. It's not just a couple of years, 40.
40. So
again,
he's 40, coming off of 2 knockouts from guys like Ricky Simon, who's not knocking out anybody.
Well, that all of a sudden he's a knockout machine. So.
Yeah, he dropped Shore and submitted him. It's like, come on, man! The fight goes to decision there. But yeah, so in this case, right? I would like to get better than plus 105 for a fight doesn't go in a bantamweight fight. I'd like to get better than plus 135. On the plus money side for this one, but I think that maybe a Henry inside the distance or a Henry finish only prop. You could max bet it because
his KO's plus 185. Just his submissions plus 1100. But
okay,
his KO's plus 185 if you're interested.
Yeah, see, that's kind of interesting. What is he plus 150 for inside the distance or something like that?
170. So there's really no reason to even take the KO.
Yeah. So just take the inside the distance just in case it's a club and sub or something like that, because the difference isn't enough to roll the dice there. But Henry's volume is going to be a problem for Sansao. Henry's incredibly durable. He's never been finished. He's had 2 fights with Denis Lavrentev, who's one of the best grapplers outside, one of the best control grapplers outside of the UFC right now. And if Lavrentev isn't finishing him, a 40-year-old Rafael Sansao isn't. Sansao only has 3 finishes at the UFC level, and they happened like 10 years ago against guys you've never heard of. So I like Victor Henry here. I think the finish only prop could be something that you could bet heavy because Henry's never been finished. And for him to be finished by a 40-year-old Rafael Sansao would be absolutely shocking. So I'm going to call a Henry finish only prop here. And
it's probably going to be minus. It might be minus 600.
But if it's better than minus 300, you never know. I mean, like it might be worth throwing 3 units on.
Well, he's minus 330 right now. So the finish only prop's probably going to be. It's got to be 600, 700 when it comes out.
It might be. There might be no value in it in this week. And that's just another example, Lou, of these books having these fights that are, kind of going to happen one way. And they see it the same way we do. And they're just overpricing those obvious outcomes so that we don't get to jump on them this week. Right. Yeah, man. And when we go over here to the nonviolent side, we're seeing these overpricings here by decent amounts, but when we compare it to the benchmark, we're not really getting enough value there in order to overpay by that much, especially when you see that these guys are older, 35 and 40, and that especially that Austin Sal's been finishing his last two. So, yeah, I'm going to go with the unders being more value on this side, but it's a fight that the time props are not sticking out.
It's another fight where the time prop is completely correlated with one fighter in a fight here. So
exactly. Yeah, might as well just take the Henry violence instead of going with the time props.
And you gain, you're gaining 65 cents on it to take the inside distance as opposed to fight that goes. So, but that ends the prelims, and now we can move on to the main card. Or do I have that wrong? Am I missing a fight here?
The next one that I'm showing is Martinez versus Davis.
Okay, I might have. Oh no, I got it.
And I'm going to take this Magny Rodriguez and just remove that one.
No, I'm looking at it wrong. Okay, right. I did it right initially. This is the first of two Brandons on the card, by the way. Not suggesting a Brandon parlay, but you could do that if you wanted to really impress your friends, or a fade Brandon. A not let's go Brandon parlay, let's say. Sorry, I had that one written down yesterday. I'm like, should I use this on the show? Because when Brady watches it back, he's going to be like, oh my goodness.
Don't worry, Brady's on vacation, man.
He's like, why do I have Lou sub in for me all the time? Manny Martinez against Brandon Davis at 135. Manny Martinez, sort of an interesting run to this point. Looked really tough against Ronnie Lawrence. Did not look great against Guido Canetti, but he's tough. And Brandon Davis, I would say not that. Maybe the opposite in some of his fights. So going to be very interesting to hear the time prop signs on this one.
Yeah, so right when we look at the violence side here, we see a little bit of overpricing, but not crazy. 3%, 4.5%, 5.5%. But when we look at the metrics, a lot of big negative numbers here. And I'm kind of wondering why, because if we scroll down a little bit, I mean, Manny Martinez, 9 of 12 fights finishing inside the distance, 75%. But for Brandon Davis, it's less than 50%. And he's the more experienced mixed martial artist. So we got a 57% finish rate amongst these two guys. And only 4 of their 12 combined UFC fights have finished inside the distance. Now, we saw Manny Martinez basically starching everybody before he got to the UFC. Even guys like Tercios and one other guy that he had on his resume pre-UFC, showing that power. But now that he's at the UFC level, we don't really see him just having that one-punch knockout power. He even dropped Ronnie Lawrence a couple of times, but wasn't able to finish him.
I had a round 3 KO prop in that too.
I
was losing my mind. Wow. I was like, oh my God, he's gonna get it.
Yeah, dude, if you call that, that's just crazy. But
well, it paid more. It pays more than the round 1 KO, so you have to.
Yes, always.
It pays more, Wheezy.
Yeah, and it happens less. But right now, I mean, this looks like an overbet to me, right? Fight Goes is at minus 120. That's overpriced by about 3.7% when we compare it to the Fight Goes benchmark for the division at 135. But we're underpaying by 12.12% when we compare that 54% implied probability to the combined finish rates of both fighters, or the combined decision rates, which comes out to 66.67%. So when we take 66.67, we subtract 54.55, we're getting that 12.12%. So we're getting a little bit of a break here on these over bets. The over 2.5 at minus 133 here is only overpriced by 0.18%. I like that. That's my favorite bet for this fight, is the over 2.5, because when you compare the rates here, right, the fight goes to decision 50.86% of the time, but the fight goes over 2.5 57% of the time. So that is over a 6% edge there, right? 6%. But we're only paying up 2.5% here. So we should be paying more for this over 2.5. So the over 2.5 at minus 133. Look, Brandon Davis got knocked out by Dana Bakary in his last fight. First time the dude has ever been knocked out in his career, okay?
Giga couldn't knock him out.
What's that?
Giga Chikadze couldn't knock him out.
Yeah, right. But the thing is that Giga fight was at 145, and when Brandon is huge, dude, when he cuts down to 135, there's the potential that he does get knocked out there. He's less durable at 135 than he is at 145. That's just a fact. But he's also more dangerous at 135. But I still like these overs. I think that maybe it might have just been a fluke. We might see that Brandon Davis durability come back. He's had enough time to recover from that knockout. That was a while ago. So I'm looking at these overs because the unders are ridiculously overpriced compared to the histories of these two guys at the UFC level, going to decision 66.67% of the time, finishing inside the distance 33% of the time, and then you're paying 52. No thanks. So this is one fight where I actually do see a little bit of value in the time props, and it's the over 2.5 that's sticking out.
Should mention that if you look at Martinez's last two fights, the Ronnie Lawrence one, well, Ronnie Lawrence is not a big finisher, but Martinez showed a lot. He still had some decent cardio in the third round. And the fight before that, the crazier one, is that him and Guido Canetti, I know there were extenuating circumstances with he had a loss in his camp that week. But Canetti, going the distance in a Guido Canetti fight is, typically that's not a bet I ever want to take. So he's gone the distance in both of those fights. I find that very, very interesting in that he just, I don't know, like he's dangerous early and then he's dangerous late and then he's not dangerous for 10 minutes. I know it sounds like really weird, but that's how I feel like he fights. Like the first 2 minutes he's live for a KO, the last 2 minutes he's live, and then it's kind of, let's wait and see.
Yeah. And sometimes these guys are a little more patient at the UFC level than they were on the regional scene. And, you just expect them to go in there with the reckless abandon that we saw on the regional scene. Look, Manny Martinez, I believe his first 9 fights as a pro finished inside the distance. And now the last 3, I believe, have went to decision. So it just goes to show you that the ability to finish is, it's just much harder at the UFC level than it is on the regional scene.
All right, well, let's get to this next barn burner, this meat grinder of a light heavyweight fight. Misha Circanov coming off a loss to Wellington Turman
by armbar from guard
against Alonzo Menifield, who is still not even that far removed from not finishing Ed Short Fuse Herman. In between that, he beat a guy whose record is now officially listed as 3-96 in Mozarov. And he lost to William Knight in a fight that I actually thought he had won the fight, but either way, didn't really do anything in that fight. So it's interesting that this is under 1.5 because Menifield, he looks like he should be such a killer, but his record suggests he's not this first round threat. Whereas Circanov, I still have PTSD from the Wellington Turman debacle.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because, first of all, I know that Misha's not had a great run lately. He lost to Jotko, he lost to Wellington Turman, but both of those fights were at 185. It was a new weight class for him. He wasn't used to making that cut. Now he's back up to 205, which is where we saw the best Misha, where we saw him getting some wins. The grappling prowess of this man is it's not to be messed with. And I mean, Menifield, dude, the wins for Alonzo Menifield. I just want to remind everybody, I mean, if you're laying juice on this guy, was it the win over Charant? Was it the win over a 53-year-old Ed Shortfuse Herman? The liar, Askar Mozarov, and before that, he's getting starched by Oven St. Preux. He loses to Devin Clark in a decision. He beat Paul
Craig, which is,
very impressive. I mean, he hurt Craig. Craig was trying to wrestle, caught him coming in with a shot behind the ear and just dropped him and finished him,
The Ed Herman fight, by the way, was the one where he was trying to pace himself a little more, and he kept leg kicking him to the point where, and this is what I hate about some of these guys, he kicked him so much that the ref even said, you're like 1 or 2 kicks away from if you don't block these kicks. Like Herman could barely walk, and then Menifield just stopped kicking him.
Yeah,
dude, so it seemed like he was trying a new approach of pacing himself. And you saw it in the William Knight fight as well. So I just want that to be mentioned as we go into this time prop, especially sitting at 1.5.
Yep. At 1.5, it's the under 1.5 at 53.5% implied probability right now is overpriced by 7% when we compare it to the benchmark. But my God, it's underpriced by 19.24% when you compare the statistics for both of these guys at the UFC level to that 53.5% implied probability, which means that 73.25% of the time, these guys are finishing under 1.25 rounds, and we're only paying 53%. So it's a good number. This is a bet that is not completely overpriced yet, as these guys go under 1.5 at a 26.32% rate, higher than what the division does on a whole. So you've got Menifield, who's very dangerous on the feet. You got Circanov, who's actually kind of dangerous on the feet. But if it goes to the ground, unless Menifield's on top, I think he's going to have a lot of problems with Misha. Misha is not only very strong and a very capable wrestler, but he's also got fantastic submission grappling. The Peruvian necktie that he locked up over Jimmy Crute was just an absolute thing of beauty. The way he rolled through on that, put that chest right into his sternum. There was no way Jimmy was getting out of that. And Jimmy's a black belt. Jimmy is a very good submission grappler, and he got caught with that. If this thing is on the ground, Misha's going to be live. And if it's on the feet, I think both guys at 205 throw with a lot of power here. So that under 1.5 is not overpriced here. And when we go over to the other side, for guys that are as violent as Menifield and Circanov have been, and don't forget, Circanov 12 UFC fights, 11 of them have finished inside the distance. The only one that didn't was against Krzysztof Jotko. So look, Menifield, Circanov, that's got you leaning under, right? Just when you hear the two names. So you want to be seeing big numbers here. Big numbers if you're going on the other side, if you're taking the variant side of this equation, saying that the fight goes over. You need way more than this to absorb these massive overpricings that we see here when we compare both of these guys' finish rates at the UFC level, to the finish rates for the division, and to the implied probability of the line. So I would have to bless the under 1.5. And the fight doesn't go to decision, and under 2.5 here. Under 2.5, under 1.5, fight doesn't go, all bettable for this fight.
What do you think this fight looks like if it hits the third round?
I think
disaster? Is it just a complete disaster at this point? Or
it could be, because Misha's averaging about 5 takedowns per 15 minutes, so you would think that he's going to be wrestling. And then you look at the takedown defense of Menifield, and it's excellent, right? So if this fight does get to the third round, it means nobody's been knocked out yet, which means that it might be up against that fence a lot. There might be a lot of grappling going on. It could be where both of these guys are absolutely exhausted, because they're both well-conditioned athletes, but they got a ton of muscle on their frames. and the heart's just got to pump that much harder to feed all that muscle when you're fighting. So I think it get very sloppy if it gets to the third round, and it easily could be finished by a strike that lands correctly.
I think if this thing hits the ground, if Circanov's on top, he's going to get a submission. If Menifield's on top, I don't know how Circanov's going to get him off him. So it's going to be really interesting. That could be the fight, but we're going to move on to middleweight, and this is one that I think everybody on Twitter bet the second the line came out.
Yeah.
As best fight odds would call him, Dusko Todorovic.
Yeah.
Against
That's the second time in a row, by the way, that they've done that.
And they just have no. They figure he's going to get cut at some point. There's no reason to correct it. Against the Beverly Hills Ninja, Jordan Wright, coming off getting submitted by Marc-Andre Barriault. Of all the outcomes that I thought were possible, that was not maybe one of them. But under 1.5 juiced, very, very big here. I think it. I don't have a fight doesn't go the distance here. I would imagine it's going to be.
I got it at minus 610.
It sounds about right.
Yep.
But the number, at least the eye test says this number is not only justified, but we're probably getting a bargain on it. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when you compare the combined stats of these guys at the UFC level, right? So Todorovic and Wright, their fights have finished inside the distance 10 of 12 times, right? And then when you compare like the under 2.5 number of 80%, these guys are actually finishing under 2.5, 83.33% of the time. When you compare the 68.25% implied probability of the minus 215 for under 1.5, we will see that these guys actually finish under 1.5 75% of the time. It's actually underpriced by 6.75% at minus 215, right? So even though it's overpriced by 31.37%, I would rather shy away from a line that's overpriced by 10% than one that's overpriced by 31%. Because those ones that are overpriced by 31%, that's just the bookies telling you, fuck, if this thing goes over 1.5, we're as surprised as you would be, you know? So even at this ridiculous implied probability, even at this ridiculous number, these guys are these guys are finishing at a, way higher rate at under 1.5 than the division does. And they're still not overpriced based on what these guys have already done at the UFC level. Then you look at the stylistic matchup. This thing goes to the ground. Todorovic submits Jordan Wright probably within 60 seconds. And if it stays on the feet, both of these guys are very dangerous to land a big shot. So I like Dusko to win. I like him to win under 1.5 rounds here. And I think at minus 215, the under 1.5 is a potential parlay piece here.
I would agree with that. I just got to say that this right round 1 KO at plus 800, do I think it's a trap? Of course. Am I going to bet it? You're goddamn right I'm going to bet it. Of course I am. It's his win condition. How do I not take it? And look, Todorovic's shown he's definitely getting chinny. So it might only take one shot from Wright. I'm with you on this under. It's a great parlay piece. It's going to be one of my strongest plays on the whole. I'd probably look at fight doesn't start round 2 just to kind of get a little more meat on the bone on that one. But
yeah, and here's a good way to look at it, right? The fight doesn't go for this fight is sitting at minus 610, right? So in order to win 2 units, right, you'd have to bet 12.2 units on that, right? But if Jordan Wright's half of this fight, and in order for this thing to finish inside the distance, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either Todorovic is going to finish Wright or Wright's going to finish Todorovic. When does Wright get his finishes? Here's a guy with no cardio, no chin. So it either comes in the first round or never. In order to win 2 units, instead of laying 12.2, how about you lay 0.25 on that Wright plus 800? You can win 2 units with a quarter unit based on half of this fight's best win condition, which is a first round knockout for Jordan Wright. So I'm going to be betting it as well. I'll have a quarter unit on Jordan Wright at plus 800, and I'll be looking to even get it better than that when it opens up on potentially DraftKings or FanDuel.
You can still get a better deal betting the fight doesn't go here than you can on Bo Nickel inside the distance against Jamie Pickett.
Yep.
It's unbelievable. All right, let's move on. We got 3 fights left. Next up is flyweight Askarov against Brandon Royval. Have to say, was very surprised when I saw this number at first. I did think it would be in the plus odds. I was very surprised to see it a shade lower than that. That I feel like that is more on like Royval's win and loss condition than anything else. But what do you think about this one being minus 110 and minus 120 fight doesn't go?
Yeah, it's very interesting because we see that we're overpriced here. 10.36%, 10.2%, 13.27%. And then when we compare these guys' UFC statistics with how they're going, not to decision, under 2.5, under 1.5, we're still overpaying. 9% here, 2.62% here, 1.66% here. So these unders for a flyweight fight, and then when you got Askarov, who 5 fights at the UFC level, the guy's never been finished and never finished an opponent. So it's these overs that intrigue me, because the fact that Askarov is a guy who finished regional scene competition but got to the UFC, and he fought a couple guys that nobody's going to ever finish in Brandon Moreno and Pantoja, but he also fought some guys that you can finish, Kai Kara France. The other 2 wins for Askarov were against guys that have been finished before. So I'm not entirely sure why these violence props are so juiced up when you see this here. Askarov, 10 of 15 fights finishing inside the distance. So all 10 of his pre-UFC fights finished inside the distance. And then the guy gets up here and is fighting good competition, and now he's got 0 finishes. In addition to that, Brandon Royval is very, very durable. He's only been finished in 2 of 6 fights. And one of those was a shoulder injury where his shoulder literally popped out of the socket, and that's why he got finished. The other one was via submission.
To Pantoja, who's,
Yeah, to Pantoja, who's an absolute monster. So, yeah, look, I like the overs here. The fact that Royval's been finished in both of his losses doesn't really mean a lot to me here, because it's Askarov who doesn't finish anybody at this level. So these violence props, in my opinion, are overpriced here, and the prop template agrees with me. In this row and in this row, you don't find any value. We've got 2 positive numbers here on the fight goes to decision at minus 110, 6.34% break here, 2.16% break there. So that's the only bet that I can actually bless, because these overs are fairly priced in my opinion, but the unders are way overpriced. So I just can't count on Askarov. I mean, don't forget, Askarov's the favorite, so
he's a sizable favorite.
Yeah, he's a sizable favorite. So if you're betting violence here, are you betting that Askarov gets his first finish against a guy who, while he's been finished twice at the UFC level, has never been finished outside the UFC? And one of those came from, like I said, an injury. So
of note, Askarov decision is plus 135, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, that's not bad, because what's the money line on them?
240, minus 240.
Minus 240. So you're taking a what would be like a 70% implied probability, and you're shifting it down to plus. What did you say the decision was?
Plus 135 for Askarov by decision.
Yeah, so that's about a 43% implied probability. It's quite a break to take a guy on his best win condition, and he's a great minute winner. And that's the other thing too, is that Royval's got horseshit takedown defense, and Askarov wins a lot of minutes on the ground. So this could be, tailor-made for him to easily win minutes on the ground and cruise to a decision here.
I don't want to compare it to the last Aldo fight, like, not to insult Jose Aldo, but this could be another one of these fights where I think when they're at distance, Royval, he throws hard. He's going to have some success. He might even get some optics if he lands some shots. But I feel like most of this fight's either going to be Askarov on top, on the ground, or having him against the cage and just wearing on him, going for takedowns, but winning minutes.
Yep.
So I'm with you. I think they're both pretty durable. I love the overs here. Again, the only thing that's stopping me is how suspicious the number just looks at first glance. Like I would have thought minus 200 for this, but bless you.
Yeah, but that the other side of the thing is Royval then, because people are going to say Royval's in this fight and he brings chaos. So if there's anybody that can bring a finish out of Askarov, it's Royval. So that's why I'm not running to the number here, because for these overs, because half of this fight is Brandon Royval and he brings a very interesting, unique style of chaos. And when it's chaos, usually somebody's getting finished either way. But I'm willing to count on the durability of both dudes here and say over 2.5 at minus 135, fight goes at minus 110 are both bettable. But man, I'd love to get plus money, plus 105, plus 110 for that fight goes. Closer to evens for the over 2.5 in order to get me excited enough that I'm going to the window.
Gotcha. Well, we have 2 fights left. I just want to bring this up. Did you see that they announced that Paddy Pimblett will be facing Bahamundis?
I did not see that. That's very interesting because I thought Paddy. Why did I hear that? I thought that he had accepted a fight against a real fighter.
Well, Bahamundis to kick his ass. I think.
Well, I mean, I'm not caught. No, I just meant before you said the Bahamundis. I thought I had heard that he was going to fight somebody decent, but Bahamundis is decent. He's very good young prospect. So that's interesting.
By the way, Jay asking Asker sub. I see it at plus 250. I put that in the chat.
Yeah, that's not bad. I don't think he's knocking out Royval, so maybe that's how he gets it. Or maybe you go Askar by sub or decision.
You'll cut it down a little bit, sure.
Yeah, you can bring it. You can bring the number down just a little bit.
Use FanDuel for those because they always give you way better prices than any other book for these kind of weird props. But going to the co-main event, we have Jonathan Martinez against Cub Swanson. Cub Swanson coming down from 145 to take this fight. Both coming off pretty impressive wins. Unless my math is wrong. I think Cub coming off the Elkins win.
Yep.
Which broke my heart. Elkins is my guy. And Jonathan Martinez, well, I bet against him last time. It was a price thing. I thought Vince Morales could KO him. Vince Morales did not KO him or land any punches in that fight. I don't care what UFC stat says. I think he landed 0 punches. I think he got leg kicked 600 times. And Martinez's decision typically seems to be the way to play him going forward. So the under for this fight, plus 120. The fight doesn't go, is plus 105. When you and I talked about this earlier in the day, I said, do you feel like this number is sort of correlated with the Cub side? And you said, because he's moving down in weight, could lead to him being a little chinnier here. So take it away, my man.
Yeah, we got a 38-year-old Cub Swanson who's fought his entire professional career at 145, now at the age of 38, after how many professional fights deciding he's going down a weight class. So this one, I mean, right there, that's just something that brings some variance that you don't want to be laying juice, no matter what the bet is, in my opinion, simply because we're seeing a different Cub Swanson this time. Look, if this guy could have cut to 135 easily, right, he would have done it 10 years ago. He would have just been fighting at 135.
Right.
To make this cut at his age, it just tells me, like, all right, dude, I can't even think of betting anything with this fight until I see Cub Swanson on the scales. It would be irresponsible. So I just don't know what to tell you guys about this fight. I mean, these unders could be cheeky. We could see Cub get knocked once in the chin and just not be able to take it at this age, potentially. Or he could look fucking fantastic. And we could have been like, Cub, why didn't you do this 10 years ago? You know, why didn't you do this after Aldo knocked you out with that jump knee? You know, why didn't you move down then? So, oh boy, this is just such a huge stay away from me. And then we can, you know, just so you see it, right? 0.36, 0.55.
The finest of margins.
Yeah, I mean, like these lines are priced exactly where they should be. The overs are a little bit overpriced when we compare them to the benchmark, and they're priced right about right when we compare them to the individual stats. So, look, if you've got a read on this, maybe you make a bet. I would say that I would shade towards those unders simply because we don't know what Cub Swanson looks like at 135. He could be way less durable, and he could be really, really powerful, right?
And we've seen Martinez get bonked.
Yes.
I mean, Grant bonked him, and Alejandro Perez had him rocked. Was it both rounds? First and second round, he had him rocked. Like right into the end of the round, he rocked him. So he's definitely...
We've seen this guy absorb big shots before, and if Cub carries that power down with him, we could see violent spots. But look at where they're priced. I mean, where do we get a break?
Right.
We're not even getting a positive break on any of these violence numbers. And when you look at the type of fighter that Jonathan Martinez is, 10 of 20 fights finishing inside the distance, 50%, meh, but only 30% of his UFC fights. So, you know, if you're betting violence here and then it just goes tits up on the day of the fight, you know, you're going to go back and look at these stats and say, I don't know why I was so confident in this. Or you're going to say, okay, maybe I bet something narrative based here. Cubs moving down. He should have more power, but he could be chinny, and therefore I'm betting the under. But you're flying in the face of some pretty nasty stats here. Less than a 50% finish rate combined for these guys in a very big sample size of 31 fights. And look at these numbers. They're still sitting right there around that number. There's no value here, dude. There's just no value here. This is a fight that I think we wait until we see what we see on the scales. After the scales, we'll go back, we'll revisit those lines. And then if anything sticks out, let's hit it. But until then, we're just waiting to see what Cub Swanson looks like on the scales.
Yeah, I may take a poke on Cub just because I hate money and I just want to bet him. Like
I like Cub Swanson.
Like,
man.
there's not
how
a
do you not be a fan of this guy?
I mean, I know we're supposed to be like, you know, I get that I have a job to do. Sometimes I tell people, I just say, I'm going to bet this guy. I love this guy. Do not tail this bet. And there's no analysis. I'm betting him because I like him.
Yeah.
But also, I bet against Jonathan Martinez last fight solely because the Morales KO was plus 900. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I get this. I get there 1 out of 9 times. I get that knockout 1 out of, like, the price justified it. But, you know, it played out the way I thought it would be him doing nothing. But we are going to move on to the main event. We still have 33 people live in the chat. Thank you guys so much. Spending your Monday, starting the fight week off right with Uncle Weezy and Faux Brady. But we will move on to the end. We have our main event, Alexa Grasso against Viviane Araujo. It's at flyweight. I put 3 numbers up here. I'm not quite sure why I did that, but like, why don't I just put all of them if I was going to do this many? But under 3.5 plus 200. Fight doesn't go plus 150. So you're not even really getting that much of a break for that last 7.5 minutes of the fight between middle of the 4th and the end of it.
Do you know what they got for the fight goes, Lou? Because I had a different number for fight doesn't go, so I just want to update the fight goes here.
I'm on best fight odds right now.
Okay.
It says fight goes is minus 205.
Okay.
And now it says plus 165, but yeah. Betway had minus 200 plus 150. I'm looking at
Okay, yeah. So I got minus 205. All right, yeah, go ahead, man.
I have nothing more to add to setting you up for this.
So let's talk 5-round analytics, right? Before we get into this fight, women's flyweight fights. Now, this is very interesting, right? Because we see 21 women's strawweight fights that are 5 rounds, 24 women's bantamweight fights that are 5 rounds, you know, and then flyweight fights, 21, 31, 46, much higher sample sizes. The one that's really just off is 11 fights in the women's flyweight division have been 5 rounds, and that's since 2013. So we got a very small sample size, but we got a divergent number here. 36.36% of 5-round fights that are at 125-pound women are finishing inside the distance. If we go to the 3-round analytics, we see that they're finishing 40.74% of the time. So everybody's favorite MMA gambler is Yanni the Greek, right? And what does Yanni the Greek
Obviously.
talk about?
Regression.
Everybody's favorite. And he talks about regression back to the meat.
I'm never doing the show again.
But this is a situation where we actually have to start looking for it a little bit, because there's no reason that we should ever see a higher finish rate in a 3-round fight on the aggregate than we would in a 5-round fight. 25-round fights will just always finish inside the distance more. So, like, for instance, 30.5% of 3-round fights that are women's strawweight fights finish inside the distance. At 5 rounds, that's 47%. Bantamweight, it's 70%. Look at that, 70.83%. But for 3-round fights, it's only 37. It's like literally double the finish rate. But here we've got a situation where flyweight fights are only finishing inside the distance 36% of the time, in a 5-round fight. So right now we've got this plus 150 for fight doesn't go to decision. That's a 40% implied probability. We take that and we subtract the benchmark. We're getting about a 3.6% edge. Nothing to go running the window for.
It's also the last fight of the night, though. So a lot of, I know it doesn't factor into the stats, but it factors into, do I feel like getting one last bet in?
Yes, exactly. And you might see that action come in, shortly before the fight starts as people try to recoup their losses or whatever, or maybe even add to their wins, however it's going for people. But the weird thing is that neither one of these ladies have been 5 rounds before. They've never even been scheduled for 5. Grasso, no. Araujo, no. So are we going to see this fight go the full 5 rounds, especially when we've seen Vivi gas after 3 rounds before? So I like the fight doesn't go, but if these things are only finishing inside the distance 36% of the time, I feel like we should be getting a fatter number on this. I feel like we should be getting plus 180, plus 200, which is where it was earlier in the week. But man, I think Glenbot's saying, they're over 1.5 and over 2.5 in 9 out of the 10 of their last 5 fights each. So when we take the last 5 for Grasso, we take the last 5 for Vivi, in only that fight against Joanne Calderwood did we see that fight go under 1.5 and under 2.5. And Calderwood, she quits as soon as she starts grappling. I mean, she's the easiest woman to submit in the flyweight division.
That was a fluke sub. Not a fluke. I shouldn't say that it was a fluke on Grasso's part. Just kind of it was an unexpected result.
So as I remember when I was breaking down that fight, somebody on my channel said, "What do you think of Grasso by sub?" And I was like, "Well, all right, let's look at the stats. Alexa Grasso has like less than 5 takedowns in her UFC career, and she's never even attempted a submission. So just because Joanne Calderwood has been submitted a couple of times, you don't want to make that bet, because you have to count on Grasso getting a takedown and then attempting her first submission and then just hoping that it works. Well, what happened? That's exactly what happened. Sometimes the numbers, don't tell the whole story. So, but in this case, we need to be getting a much bigger number than plus 150 in order to chase that fight doesn't go, in my opinion, because both of these ladies are durable. Both of these ladies are well matched. This is a close fight. And, even though we haven't seen either of them go 5 rounds before, the benchmark's telling us that, the benchmark's only 36% for fights finishing inside the distance. So it's not something I can go running to the window for. And then I'm not laying 67.21% when I haven't seen either of these ladies ever even in a 4th round before. So it's another one that feels like a giant stay away, dude.
I don't know how to say ring a ding ding like you do. So can you honor us?
We got 2 ring a ding ding here on the MMA Engine channel from our guy Glenbot 5000 and from our guy J772012. A couple of fantastic donations, keeping the lights on here at the MMA Engine. We appreciate everybody that's watching and everybody that donates, everybody that hits that big up button, everybody that subscribes to the channel. Big ups to all of you. We got my guy Chris Kalanzis in the room, the savior of misbehavior, one of my nicknames in college that I stole from Greg Dooley, the lead singer of the Afghan Wigs.
As I am the sinister minister, those names go very well together, I think.
So yeah, that's what I got, man. This is a stay away. I need more plus money to bet that fight doesn't go here. It's just they're not trying to make us interested this week, my man. I just didn't see a lot here that I like.
So, as you guys do all the time, why don't we end this with the probability parlay?
Let's do it. Okay, so I liked that under 1.5 for Circanov Menifield at -115 because I think that both of these guys are very dangerous wherever the fight goes. If this thing gets to the ground with Circanov on top, I think he's live for a submission. And I think both of these guys are very live to hurt each other on the feet. And, I think Menifield's takedown defense could keep this standing. And if he does, Circanov's chin has not held up well lately. So I think the under 1.5 at -115 could be a leg. And then I also like the under 1.5 for Wright versus Dushko at -215. I think if we parlay those two, we can get a nice plus money number here and count on our two best violence bets, and then count on the fact that we have finishers in terms of Circanov and Menifield are both finishing their wins at the UFC level. 12 of 13 combined wins inside the distance for Circanov and Menifield. And for Todorovic and Wright, the wins inside the distance, 4 of 5. And more importantly, the losses inside the distance, 6 of 7. So I think if we take the under 1.5 at Wright Dushko -215, the under 1.5 for Circanov Menifield, that'll give us a nice plus number.
It's a Jordan Wright fight. I mean, sometimes you gotta do
the best fight odds. I'll get up the little parlay calculator here, and we'll find what this one goes out to. So we go to Todorovic versus Jordan Wright under 1.5, which is not even listed here. But we do know that it's like -215. So I'll just click this -225 here. That's something that's pretty similar.
What are the numbers? I got it.
Oh, no, here. Yeah, -215. I'll take the Alexa Grasso money line because that's -215. And then we'll take a -115 for the under 1.5 for Todorovic, for Circanov Menifield. And that will give us under 1.5 -115 plus 174.
Not bad. Not too shabby.
I think I'm going to be betting that, my man. Let's parlay both of those, stack cash tickets like flapjacks, and then move on to UFC 280, where we're going to have a lot better lines to attack because we've got more experienced fighters, and we'll be able to, take advantage of that line movement for when people use their eyes, and then the data will tell us when they get overpriced or underpriced, and we can hop on and get on the other side.
So thank you guys for tuning in. Wheezy, I love doing shows with you. We don't do it enough. Tell the people where they can find you this week. I know the next 2 days are probably very busy for you.
They will be, yeah. So tomorrow night, you can find me 10 o'clock Central Time. I would say after Dana White's Contender Series, but we're not going to be seeing Dana White Contender Series for a few months here. So 10 o'clock Central Time for Just the Tip with Uncle Wheezy. We'll break down all 12 of these fights from a stats and tape study perspective. Finish with Uncle Wheezy's ass shaving of the week. I'll also do an Ask Wheezy on Wednesday night, which will be part this card and part UFC 280 because I've already got all the stats out to my Patreon members for UFC 280. We could talk about that as well. And then you can find me right here on the MMA Engine YouTube channel every Monday for Propability. You guys, the only thing left to do is to stack cash tickets like flapjacks for UFC Vegas 62. Let's get it.
I will be you missed a show, which I will be on. It'll be Wednesday night at 7 o'clock on Pub Culture TV. I will be subbing in for Brady on that one as well.
That's right. I forgot about that one. Yes.
I always like doing the DraftKings show there.
Yeah, man.
I'll drop a prop show on Thursday on this channel, and then Friday with Monk, we do the happy hour where he handles all your DraftKings questions. I test out stand-up. It's a great time. It really is just a good time had by all. And we'll see you later in the week. Good luck with all your time props. Good luck with your other bets. And go Phillies. Take care, guys. Goodbye.
Let's go.